Hi there again. This is week five, OT 300, Human Movement. In this lecture, talking about making some connections with some of the stuff we're learning and learning some new stuff. This idea of making occupation meaningful, how it connects with exercise and in particular activities that the person likes to do, trying to kind of mold some concepts together as we get ready for the midterm. Okay, if I can get this to work. This is part one, just getting into the idea of what is meaningful occupation and what is a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. So again, what is meaningful occupation? I think you've already started to hear a lot about this. And these two different approaches to therapy, a top-down and a bottom-up. I'll tell you what those mean, important concepts for the midterm. Just going back to review, looking at Rick, we're going to apply his story to some of the concepts. This week's content, thinking about Rick, and again, as an occupational therapist, you have to really think about Rick, the person, where he's coming from. Some of these characters, a lot of the patients you'll be dealing with, you may not agree, with decisions they make, the lives that they lead, but you really need to kind of think like they think. Put yourself in their shoes, kind of use your imagination to get their point of view, so you can really understand what's a meaningful goal for them, where to go with therapy. It's going to make your therapy so much more impactful if you can kind of see it as they see it. That's kind of what we're trying to get at, some training around that, thinking around that with these stories, along with the basic OT concepts that are being applied in the stories. How is Rick a product of his beliefs and background, and what particular events shaped the person that he is, and how so? He grew up in the South, very patriotic, obviously. I think that influenced his life viewpoint very much, why he decided to go into the military and defend his country, or went back, even when he was an older, middle-aged man, to help out that where he could. That sense of duty, sense of commitment to his fellow comrades, fellow troops, fellow soldiers, I think, was very strong with him. Particular events, the big events, obviously, was the explosion that happened. Again, he's a real client. He actually still alive today. He's doing better last time I saw. And that was a real explosion that happened in Iraq during that terrible time. There was a lot of U.S. troops were over there, and there was a lot of IEDs and different kinds of explosions. So that really shaped the person that he was the time he came into therapy. Really was something he was very much struggling with. And obviously, the loss of his son really shaped who he was, what he was dealing with the grief and the trauma over all those huge events. His marriage as well. Those are probably the big three influences on his life. What did he love to do? He loved to be a soldier. He loved to take care of people. He loved to be in the healthcare field, like you guys. He liked that idea of altruistically helping others. He needed to be feel like he was of purpose, of use, helping others, serving the cause, so to speak, the larger cause. And that really was something he felt a strong need to, and he lost that with the explosion, losing his military, his ability to perform as a as a healthcare clinician and all that sort of stuff. How does Rick's interests, what he loves to do, influence the OT's decision for treatment? He wanted to go back, and get back into the military, get back into the healthcare stuff, but it wasn't realistic. He did use his interest in playing poker with the cards to work on his attention, different parts of his memory. I'll talk more about that. I think there's more that I could have done thinking back around his interests, more in the home. And that thing towards the end, if you remember at the end of the story, he starts emailing his old fellow soldiers back in Iraq. And he makes that connection with them, and they look toward. He's like an elder, figure to them, and he starts giving them advice, and they look towards him for advice. So he had meaning with that. I think was really important. Here's our lecture questions for this week. What you need for the quiz, the midterm. Okay, this idea of something that is purposeful and meaningful. What do we mean by that? If you're doing something you love to do versus doing something you have to do. something you like to do versus a chore. Um, People are doing an activity that they love to do in therapy versus doing an exercise or something that is a chore that is work. They get better faster. They focus on the activity, not just the motions of the exercise. So the gold standard as an occupational therapist with your client is to do activities with them, not exercises, activities. Exercises are more just something somebody has to do. And activities, you can find the right activity with that person, and we'll kind of talk about that more. It can really work well, and they can get better a lot faster. Meaningful activities is a concept of flow. What do we mean by that? Occupational engagement. You've heard these terms, or we'll hear more of these terms in this program. Flow is something that you love to do, and it kind of defines you love to do it so much that you lose a sense of time. I know personally, if I'm doing some writing, fiction writing, or doing some reading, or spending activities, doing activities outside, I lose a sense of time. Time disappears, and I'm just really, really into what I'm doing because I like what I'm doing. You may have things that you like to do that do that for you. Is it playing golf, playing tennis, skiing, socializing with friends? Something you love to do, you lose your sense of time. You're fully engaged in that activity. That's like the ultimate activity. You can find that with your client to do what they love to do, or getting as close as you can to what they love to do. And then there's those things that they have to do. They need to do to kind of function in the world. And this will be your focus a lot in rehab. They have to get dressed. They have to get on and off that toilet. They have to be able to make a meal for themselves, get into their house. These are essential things they love to do, things they have to do. These are the meaningful things, the purposeful and the meaningful things that we need to focus on as occupational therapists. Another example, painting the house. You're told you how to paint the house, and you paint the house because you have to do it. It's kind of something you have to do. But versus painting a birdhouse for your grandson, the grandson's going to love it, and you're really engaged in that activity, and you lose your sense of time. Painting the house is kind of essential. Painting a birdhouse because you love to do it, and you're really looking forward to giving that to your grandson. Can take it to a whole higher level, more meaningful level. And you really ideally are an active voluntary participant in the activity. You see this picture here. So this is a meaningful activity for this woman. She loves to shop, not so much for him. It's just not meaningful for him. Okay, so now we have these two different kinds of approaches that I mentioned, top-down and bottom-up. You need to know these well. Top-down approach is what occupational therapists usually do with your client. We're talking about, let's say it's arm use. Say he's having a hard time using his arm, and he needs to obviously use his arm to do what he loves to do, needs to do, which is to be a conductor, or maybe it's something else, putting dishes away in the cupboard, or whatever it is that's meaningful to them. When you start top down, you start with the actual activity, the goal that they want to do. So you may be doing some conducting, simulating conducting in the clinic, putting away cupboards in a home health scenario. The meaningful functional activity is the focus, or at the top of your approach. You're just doing activities. Bottom up, this is more traditional physical therapist. Physical therapist is more bottom up. Occupational therapist is more top down. Not to say that it doesn't go back and forth at times. Definitely occupational therapists sometimes do exercises to build the component parts of the activity. So we're going to talk about, but generally it's more physical therapists will do this. So physical therapists, you start with the exercise. That is your primary focus, improving their range of motion, improving their strength, leading to the person to be able to do the activity again that they love to do, such as conducting. So you would focus on his arm range of motion and strength, thinking eventually he's going to get the motion and strength back to do the conducting. Whereas a top-down, you're going to conduct. You're going to do activities with it. You're going to go right to the heart of the matter. This kind of combines, you make something purposeful and meaningful, and you focus on an activity. It really combines blends an art and science of OT. Really good OTs are combining both. They aren't just doing the activity without realizing what the activity is really doing. What component parts is the activity really working on to blend meaning with the underlying physical components? And this is kind of what you're getting really a lot of this semester is this anatomy, and then in the spring, the neurology, the physiology that are involved in these particular motions. So you're learning just the anatomy of the particular motions and all that, but you've got to think in terms of what is it all about. It's in the underlying context of doing the activity that's important to the person. To fully understand what is truly meaningful to your client and the barriers involving and accomplish that meaningful activity. If you know the anatomy and the physiology of him working his shoulder and his elbow and his hand and his finger really, really well, you're going to quickly do your movement analysis thing and see what the problem is. Why can't he conduct his, be a conductor? Why can't he do his conducting with his orchestra? Do we just need to improve his range of motion? Is there certain muscles within there that need to improve, certain nerves, certain physiology? So you can kind of see, this is the part, this is the missing link in the chain, going back to that we need to fix to get him to be able to do what he needs to do. And then connecting it back to Rick. How were meaningful occupations? What were meaningful occupations to Rick? How do you know this? How did the OT address this? How did the OT tend to blend underlying physical components with meaning? So he wanted to be of use, of service. He loved, and then on a lower level, he loved to play cards. He loved to talk. He was very social, and he loved playing cards and that sort of thing. So the therapist, okay, he likes playing cards. I can sit here and give him a pencil and paper test to work on his memory and his attention, those cognitive deficits that he has from the brain injury that your analysis, your eval teased out and found as problems that we need to work on to get him back to doing the things we want to be able to do. We could do paper and pencil tests and that sort of thing, or we can do a meaningful activity. In this case, the meaningful activity was playing cards to work on those underlying components of his brain function and his thinking and all that. He could have done more, I think, as the OT. Rick also loved to be of use around the house. Yard work. I think he could have done a lot of yard work to work on his shoulder. He had issues around his shoulder, raking, all that sort of stuff. He could have done that easily. I could have done that easily with him versus focusing so much on the cognitive stuff. Did the OT use a top-down or bottom-up approach? How so? Depending on what he was doing, I think it was more a bottom-up approach. He was doing ultrasound and exercises for the shoulder. That was definitely bottom-up for the shoulder. In terms of his brain and the thinking issues that the therapist was working on, you could argue it was more top-down. He had the cards and doing stuff with his phone. I can't remember what's in the story now, but he did a lot of stuff around games around his phone to work on his cognition, activities in the house, remembering his pills that were more real-world activity versus paper and pencil kind of exercise thing. All right, that's the end of that section.